A gute Woche. The Rebbe Zolgesundheim began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Chazoin. And Bichlal, especially in these days, wherever we can find regarding any Inyan, an Inyan shel schus, finding good in an Inyan, it is definitely important and the right thing to do so. And the same would apply Benegay is something which is so general as this Shabbos, which is called Shabbos Chazoin. And particularly, how the Alter Rebbe teaches us in Shara Yichud Ve'emunah that the name of something is of extreme importance to the extent that every Inyan receives its chayas through the name it has. And if we are talking about Shabbos Chazoin, which this is the name of this Shabbos, we can imagine how important it is to look for an Inyan, the good Inyan that has a shaykhs to this Shabbos Chazoin. The Rebbe added on that Alter Rebbe explains this in the first Perek of Shara Yichud Ve'emunah. He said it is accepted by Chassidim that the Alter Rebbe originally intended that really the first chelik of Tanya should be the Shara Yichud Ve'emunah. Later the Alter Rebbe changed and made the Likutei Amarim the first chelik. But initially he intended to have Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, the opening of Tanya. In fact, even today, we have in the Akdamah to Shara Yichud Ve'emunah, the Alter Rebbe uses the expression K'moishe nisboer, as it will be explained, and the Alter Rebbe refers to the Tanya. And this the Alter Rebbe left even after he changed his mind, so to speak, and he arranged that the Likutei Amarim should be the first chelik, and Shara Yichud Ve'emunah should come second. Still he left this open intention of his, which shows that he really intended to have Shara Yichud as the very first chelik. So it's actually like the opening of Tanya spells out this idea that the name of something is of extreme importance, and that is what the Inyan receives its chayas from. Therefore, we're talking now about Shabbos Chazoin. The taich of Chazoin is to see. To us, Chassidim, there is a deeper meaning in Shabbos Chazoin, as it was related to us by Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, who is known for his outstanding Avas Yisrael, and it was related through Rabbi Hillel Paritcher, who related it in behalf of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchev, and Rabbi Hillel in his own right was a mekusher to the Rabbeim, and was merited and fortunate to be a shaliach from the Tzemach Tzedek. And as we know, it's explained many times, the Inyan of Shaliach Shal Adam Kemoisei, that if one is one's emissary, he's exactly like him. I've explained it at many occasions that it is mamish, because there are three different interpretations in Nigla and the meaning of Shaliach Shal Adam Kemoisei. The furthest one is that it is mamish as if the person himself would be there. So if Rabbi Hillel Paritcher was a Shaliach from the Tzemach Tzedek, as if the Tzemach Tzedek would be where he sent him. And he related this taich from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev that the meaning of Shabbos Chazoin is, we see that every Yid is given an opportunity to see the Bayis Hashlishi, which will be built b'meira v'yamein. And as we know the difference between the two Batei Mikdash, the first Beis HaMikdash is compared to a Maaseh B'nei Adam. However, the third Beis HaMikdash, this is something which is eternal and will be done, will be erected by the Rabbeinu Shalom. And comes Shabbos Chazoin, the Rebishter gives an opportunity to Yidden that they should be able to see, to give a cook, to have a Chazoin on the third Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe went on explaining that the word Chazoin is an expression which we find it in Lashon HaKodesh, and we find it not only in Lashon HaKodesh, it is used in Aramaic as well. What does this show us? That not only is it an Inyan which has a shaykhs to the level of Lashon HaKodesh, but even to a lower madrege, to the madrege where we're talking about Aramaic, which is not Lashon HaKodesh. In Lashon HaKodesh, the Rebbe says there are no words from other languages. However, other languages do have words from Lashon HaKodesh. And that is why Rabbi says explained in Sifrei Kabbalah based on the word Toitafos. So Toitafos, Rashi comments that it's a composition of two words, Tat Bekatvi Pas Ba'afriki. So how does this come into Chumash if it's Lashon HaKodesh? The same regarding the word Yigar Sahadusa, which is an Aramaic word. So the Rebbe said it's explained in Ramami Panu, in Kabbalah he explains these in Yonim, how these words, that the emes is that these words are originally taken Lashon HaKodesh. And from Lashon HaKodesh it was picked up in other languages. So in Mela we're talking now about the inyan of Chazoin. This word Chazoin is originally taken Lashon HaKodesh, but later it was also picked up and became a word in Aramaic and in other languages, which comes to show us that even in lower levels, it also, in other words, every Yid has a shaykhis, that it comes this Shabbos, he can glance and see the Beis HaMikdash HaShlish. The Barditcheva explained this inyan with a mashal. And the mashal of the Barditcheva was of a father who made a beautiful garment, a beautiful dress for his daughter, but his daughter did not treasure this dress, and she ripped it. So what the father did was he took it away from her. After a time passed, he gave her again a chance. However, she did not act accordingly, and again did not take care properly of the dress, and the father was forced to take it away. What does the father do later? He has a beautiful dress hanging in the closet, comes from time to time, he takes out this dress and shows it to the daughter and tells her, will she behave properly, then he will be able to give her the dress again. The same is benegei the Beis HaMikdash HaShlish. Unfortunately, twice it was taken away from us. However, it comes a time, and this is Shabbos Chazoin, when the father shows his children this dress and gives us an opportunity to have a glance to see it, and at the same time reminds us, will we act properly, we will be rewarded and we'll be able to get it back for an eternal way. Here the Rebbe raised the question, how we see every inyan is extremely accurate. Why is it that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev gave this mashal, gave this parable from a dress and not from a house? We're talking about the Beis HaMikdash, which is a house, so it would have been obviously more appropriate and more suitable for Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev to give a mashal from a house, that there was a father who set up a beautiful house for his children, and all the details, as he gives the same mashal b'negei the dress. What is the difference between a bayis and a malbush? The Rebbe Zalman went on explaining. In a house, we cannot identify who the house is made for. Though there are general differences where we can tell whether it's a house of a poor person or it's a house of a rich person. However, no more details, no more than this, can be attributed when we want to go ahead and identify a house. However, a beget is made to the size of a person. In fact, we find in the Torah we find regarding the Big Day Kahuna, the Big Day Kahuna had to be made exactly to the size of the Kohen that wore them. Memela, that is why Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchev preferred giving a mashal of a garment, of a dress, rather than giving a mashal regarding a house. Because when we're talking about a garment, it is more suitable. Here we're talking how the Beis HaMikdash has a shaykhus to each and every Yid. And it's just like a garment which is made, a custom-made garment, which is made to fit a person. The same we're talking about the Beis HaMikdash, this is made to fit each and every Yid. And every Yid has a shaykhus to the Beis HaMikdash. And once we will have the Beis HaMikdash, that is when we will be able to see a lakus, we will be able to see getlachkeit, obviously, because this is what the Beis HaMikdash is all about, that getlachkeit will be there. The koyach hapoyel ben nifal will be seen by each and every Yid. Being as we just mentioned, that the bayis hashlishi will be made by the Rabbeinu Shalom. So the power of the Rabbeinu Shalom in erecting the Beis HaMikdash will be visible to each and every Yid. And the Rebbe compared it that it is related by Hasidim that the Maggid of Mizrich once saw a keli which was made by a person who was blind on one eye. And when the Maggid saw the keli, he didn't see the person and he didn't know the background how this keli was ever made. But the Maggid was able to recognize that this kelim was made by a person who was a summa, who was blind on one eye. Naturally, nowadays, this is something which is only for Yechidei Gula, for exceptional people, for people like the Maggid. However, when we're talking, when the Rebishter will give us back the Bayis HaShlishi, here we will all be fortunate to see the Getlachkeit in it, and the fact that it was made by the Rabbeinu Shalom, the Koyach HaPoyel Ben Nifal, the Koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what his Koyach again is Getlachkeit, will all be obvious in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Bayis HaShlishi. This, the Rebbe says, pertains regarding Shabbos Chazayin, regardless of the Kviyos of whatever date Shabbos Chazayin will fall out to be. This year, Shabbos Chazayin comes out 6 days in the month of Av. Regarding tomorrow, which is 7 days in the month of Av, we find that Chazal tell us that it was 7 days in Av that the Goyim entered the Heichel. In other words, if we will look at the whole inyan of the 3 weeks, we will find that there are various periods. First comes the period of the 3 weeks in general. After the 3 weeks, we enter the 9 days, which is where al pi halacha, there are more inyanim of sadness, which we are supposed to fulfill in the 9 days, as opposed to the 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks prior to the 9 days. Then in Shulchan Aruch we find that there's an inyan of Shavua Shechal by Tisha B'Av, the week that Tisha B'Av falls out. There are also more details how we are supposed to observe the sadness of Yemei HaChurban, as opposed to the first couple days in the month of Av. Then comes Erev Tisha B'Av and Tisha B'Av itself. And it goes to such an extent, the Rebbe says that there are various Kehilas b'Yisrael, and particularly in Eretz Yisrael, where during the 3 weeks, until it comes the 9 days, they make all types of simches, even weddings. So we see that there are some minhagim who act pretty lenient in the first part of the 3 weeks, and definitely it is based so al pi halacha. Comes the 9 days, we observe them yet strong. What is the pshat that we are today Erev 7 days in Av? Erev 7 days in Av, there's a cloud, the Gemara tells us, B'negei Shabbos, Mi shetarach be'erev Shabbos, yochel b'Shabbos. That the one who has bartered and prepared on Erev Shabbos, he will have what to eat on Shabbos. Though a Yid is all week supposed to refer to Shabbos, still we know, Kol Yoyma v'Yoyma Ovid Avidita, every single day has its inyanim, which what it requires. However, when it comes Erev Shabbos, that is when we are supposed to prepare for Shabbos. The final preparations, the major preparations, all this is done on Erev Shabbos. Memela Misha Tarach be'erev Shabbos, Yoichal b'Shabbos, this same klal applies to the preparations that have to be done today regarding to the 7 days in the month of Av. Though we know, on the other hand, that we cannot prepare from Shabbos to Chol, so how can we say that today we have to prepare to the further level in Av, which is 7 days in Av, which on that day the Goyim enter the Heichel, today is Shabbos, and we know from Shabbos to Chol one cannot prepare. The Rebbe explains the fact that one does not prepare Mishabbos l'Chol, that applies when we are looking at it on a weekly cycle. In other words, from Shabbos to Sunday, one cannot prepare. However, when we're looking at it on a monthly cycle, it is different. And he brought a mashal. In the times ago, how was the new month set? When 2 witnesses would come and they would say that they saw the new moon. What would be the case if 2 witnesses would come on Shabbos and they would say that on Shabbos they saw the new moon? It is definite that Bezdin would listen to them, and if they are found accurate and correct, then Bezdin would go ahead and go out and proclaim the new month. What does this show us? That an Indian that has a shaykhus to Chodesh, even on Shabbos, we also go ahead and prepare for the future. Memela, back to our Indian. Now when we are talking on a Shabbos, which is 6 days in the month of Av, and we have to prepare 6 days in the month of Av for the 7th day in the month of Av, it is proper, it is acceptable. Being that we know that this whole inyan of Chazoin and the whole inyan and all the details regarding the 3 weeks, the 9 days, Tisha B'Av, and so forth. All of this is an idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is makdim refuah l'makkah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending us the cure before the plague. And even if we look deeper al pipnimius, the whole inyan of churban is such that it should bring to a higher elevation after the churban. Memela, being that we know that all of these days are going to be v'hafachti evlom l'sasain, these days of mourning are going to be turned over into days of joy, into days of happiness. So memela, as it comes in the levels of sadness today, the same thing will be when the Rebishter will turn over these days. And the Rebishter will make these days Yemei Simcha, it will also keep on going higher and higher. In other words, Bein HaMetzarim in general will be Yemei Simcha. Comes to the 9 days, it'll be a yet higher level of Simcha. Comes to Shavua Shechal B'Tisha B'Av, it'll be a yet higher level. Coming to 7 days in the month of Av, which this is the day when the Goyim entered the Heichal, the Beis HaMikdash, being when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will turn this over totally, and will make these days of Yontif. This will also be another elevation in the Simcha. Memela, now today, by us preparing properly on Vavav, Misha Tarach Be'erev Shabbos, Yechol B'Shabbos, we will be Zeicha to take part, being that we're taking part in the Yemei Evel of these days. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will also reward us that we not only will we take part in the sadness of these days, but we will merit to take part in the days of joy when HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take these days v'afachti evlom l'sasain and turn them over into days of simcha v'sasain. As it's customary in the Farbrengens, the Rebbe usually learns a Rashi and discusses a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos during the summer weeks. The Rebbe says today there are many inyanim to discuss. There's the usual Rashi, Pirkei Avos. Also the Rambam, as we learned the Rambam, 3 prakim a day. And being that the Rebbe requests from us that during the 3 weeks, and particularly the 9 days, we should learn inyanim that have v'shaychas to Beis HaMikdash. There's an inyan in Hilchas Beis HaPrira to explain. And above that, the Rebbe also requests that siyams be made during the 9 days. The Rebbe says, so he also has a siyam to make in this Farbrengen. The Rebbe said, we know that there's an inyan of Einik Shabbos, and it's brought in Svarim that with children, we don't learn Shabbos as much as we learn with them a whole week. Why? In order not to interfere with their joy of the Shabbos, with them enjoying Shabbos. For them it's not an enjoyment if they would be put to learning all day. So if we're talking this about youngsters who are not obligated, do not have a chiyuv of Einik Shabbos, how much more so is it when we're talking about adults who are all obligated to have an Einik Shabbos? Why should they be interfered, their Einik Shabbos, with so many inyan? But on the other hand, the Rebbe says he hopes that no one would mind. We will be able to go through, at least briefly, b'negei each one of these inyan. B'negei the Rambam, the Rebbe learned the halacha in the first perek of the Rambam, of Hilchas Beis HaPrira, and as we will see in a minute, tied this in to the shiurim and Rambam of today's shiur and Rambam. The Rambam in the first perek tells us that all the stones which were used to erect the Beis HaMikdash, as well as for the Mizbeach, had to be complete, whole. Complete, without any chip, without any damage. Avnei Heichal va'azoris, the Rambam says, shenifkimu, if they were chipped, psulin, they cannot be used. Then the Rambam goes ahead, kol even shenoga b'habarzel, any stone which was touched by an iron, afal pi shaloi nifkimu, even it wasn't chipped, is also psula lebinyan ha-mizbeach, or binyan ha-keves. And the Rambam goes ahead, va'aboyne even shenoga b'barzel b'mizbeach, and the one that does build with a stone that did touch an iron, like it gets malchus. Va'aboyne even pogum, and one that builds with a chipped stone, over be'eser, is over with an eser. Then the Rambam goes ahead, even shenifgima a stone which was chipped, or was touched by an eye, and after it was built into the Mizbeach, or in the Keves, this stone is puzzle, and the rest of them are kosher. Rebbe noted that when the Rambam brings all these halachas, the Rambam does not tell us what is the shia of a chip on an oven. In all the Inyanim and Torah, we know there is a shia. What al pi halacha is considered a chip on a stone? So that we can know not to use this stone for the Mizbeach. Obviously, seems from the Rambam that even if the chip is b'mashahu, which means any minor chip, it is considered a chip. In the Rambam of today's Shiurim, learning Hilchos Macholos Asuras, the Rambam in Hilchos Macholos Asuras talks about the Isser of Yayin Nesach. Question arises if the Isser of Yayin Nesach is an Isser min HaTorah or it's an Isser of Midrabanan. Some Rishonim hold, the Ramban and others, that it is only Asr Midrabanan. The opinion of the Rambam is that it is Asr min HaTorah. And the Rambam tells us that Yayin Nesach is Asr even B'kolshu. There is no shear to Yayin Nesach. If one was to drink even a little bit of Yayin Nesach, normally we know there is shiurim of Kezayis, by Yisurim, or other types of shiurim. By Yayin Nesach, none of this applies, and even if he drinks a mashahu, he is over on the Isser of Yayin Nesach. It is so the question arises, what is the source of the Rambam that the Rambam tells us that Yayin Nesach should be Asa b'mashu? So the Rambam himself in Perek Yud Aleph of Hilchos Macholos Asuras says, being that Yayin Nesach is Asa because it has a Shaychus to Avodah Zarah, and by Avodah Zarah there is a pasuk v'kol ha'oichel koshu metakoyves akum mibasar and miperes afilu mayim u'melech ha'oichel mehen koshu gets malchus. Shneimar quotes a pasuk asher chelev zvachema yechelu yishtu yein nesicham. Also we have a pasuk by Iran Edachas. By Iran Edachas there is a pasuk where there is an entire city which didn't have Avodah Zarah. The pasuk tells us you should not leave over me'umah anything from that city. So we learn up from that pasuk that when we're talking b'negei Avodah Zarah, me'umah, any little bit is also. The Rebbe went ahead. We find by Shabbos also a similar inyan. The Ragachava wants to compare that by Shabbos we also find a similar inyan. And the Ragachava claims that by Shabbos we find there are many inyanim hitzah to carry, that there is a shia. However, if we look back into the Rambam tells us that there are some inyanim, even if we carry out a mashu, we do not carry much of it, we only carry any little bit, it is also considered carrying, and one is chayiv. The Rebbe says, however, there is a big difference between Shabbos and Yayin Nesach, and cannot understand how the Ragachava compares the two. True that by Shabbos we say that if he carries out any mashu, he is chayiv. However, there's shiurim, what is considered carrying. If he will carry less than Dalet Ames, he's not chayiv. If he was to carry, if he just moves around in Rishus HaYochid and does not go out from Rishus HaYochid into Rishus HaRabim, he is not chayiv. So again we see, Hoitzah has its shiurim. Whether it is Dalet Amis B'Shus Harabim, whether it is Hitzoy Meshus L'Shus, that requires an Akira and one Rishus, and the Hanoch and the other Rishus, all these inyanim are required by Shabbos, which puts Shabbos into a frame of Shiurim. However, when we're talking about Avodah Zarah, it is completely different, and there is no requirement of any Shia, even Ma'uma, any little bit, which one shall drink from Yain Nesach, which is considered an Issa which stems from Avodah Zarah. He is over on this Issa. And now, the Rebbe is tying these two Rambams together. The Rambam which is talking about chipping stones in the Mizbeach, and this in Hilchas Beis HaBchira, and the Rambam which we're talking about in Hilchas Macholas Asuros. Why are we prohibited to have chipped stones in the Mizbeach? Well, Torah tells us so. Why does the Torah say? We shall not compare ourselves to the Goyim. And you shall not do like the Goyim did. Memele, this Issa of having chipped stones in the Mizbeach or in the Beis HaMikdash is something which reflects the concept of Avodah Zarah, which is something which the Goyim did. Being so, it comes into the category that any Issa which has a Shaykhus to Avodah Zarah, even a Mashahu, even any little bit, we are not allowed to do. So there's no need for the Rambam to tell us what is considered a chip and a stone. Benegei Avodah Zarah, Benegei the Mizbeach, being that we already know from the Rambam that any Inyan that deals with Avodah Zarah, in Mashahu, Ma'uma, any little bit, is considered an Issa. The same thing applies when it comes to having chipped stones in the Mizbeach, being that the Issa of having a chipped stone in Evan Pogum is because that we shall not compare ourselves to the Goyim. Rabbi quoted the Psukim, and we shall not do as the Goyim did. Therefore, there's no need for the Rambam to tell us what the Shiur is. The Shiur is just like by any Inyan in Avodah Zarah that is also b'mashahu. The same will apply regarding the Shiur and the chip of the stone in the Mizbeach.
Because the Goyim used to chisel stones
to
make idols?
That's right. Right. Talking about the Inyan of Even Shenifgema, the stone which was chipped, the Rebbe tied this into the expression which we have, there's a pgima in a sakin. When a sheichet shechts, he's supposed to be careful that there shouldn't be any chip on the knife. How does he check his chalif? How does he check his sakin? He checks it with his nails. Rebbe said, this is a thing which is spoken about a lot in Chassidus, that when one has nails, negel, tziponayim, he's supposed to use it only for himself. For himself meaning to check out whether a chalaf is good or no good, that he can use his nails for. However, to harm others, as the expression goes in, Siddish expression would be to shtech others, this is something which nails are not made for. This is something which is prohibitive. This is something which he shall not do. The good part, to make use of his nails in order to find out if this knife is good, so that he can shecht with it, this is something which can be done. However, to use the nails for any other reason, this is something which shouldn't be done. Benegeyem, the Chumash, in today's Sedra, as it's customary, the Rebbe Zalgazan Zayin either explains a Rashi, or an Inyan in the Sedra, which is not understood, and obviously would require some sort of an explanation, and Rashi, whose Inyan is Pshuta Shel Mikra, to the extent that when there's an Inyan which requires Pshat, and Rashi does not have the proper Pshat, Rashi says Lo Yadaiti, or a similar expression. So Mamela, we come across an Inyan in this week's Sedra which requires interpretation, and Rashi bypasses it and doesn't say anything. We're talking at the end of the Sedra. The end of the Sedra, there was the arrangement made with the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain that they received their inheritance on the other side of Ever HaYarden. However, the arrangement was, it was made as a Tnai with all the halachic requirements of Tnai Koydem Lamaisa, and all the other things which we learn up from here, that they were supposed to go along with the Yidden when the Yidden went to conquer the other side of the Yarden, the Lamed Aleph Malach. And if we look into the psukim, we see not only were they supposed to go along, but chalutzim tavu. They were supposed to go as heads, as leaders. They were the front runners in the war what the Yidden had to conquer the other part of Eretz Yisrael. Let us look through the psukim at the end of the Seder, today's Shir, in fact. Pasuk says, V'atzav eschem beis ha'hilema. I told you at that time, Hashem Elokechem, this is what was told to the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruven. Hashem gave you your part as you wished on the other side of the Yarden. However, chalutzim tavu l'fnei achechem bnei Yisrael kol bnei Choyev. Then the psukim go on. He says, "V's Yeshua tzuvesi beisa hilemer." And so Yeshua, I told at that time as follows: "Einecha haroyes, your eyes see es kol asher asa Hashem, whatever lekechem, whatever Hashem did l'shnei amalachim eila, to these two huge kings." Who are we talking about? Oig melech Habashan and Sichon, who were the ones that were conquered on the other side of the Yarden. So he's telling Yeshua, "Ken yasa Hashem l'chol ha'mamlachos, to all the kingdoms ashata oiv Hashem." Then we come to the last pasuk in this week's Seder. Pasuk is Lo tirom, don't fear them. Ki Hashem Elokechem hu hanilcham lachem, because Hashem is the one who's really running the battle for you. Who is HaKadosh Baruch Hu talking here to? Lo tirom, don't fear them. Who should not have fear? So Adam Mefarshei HaTorah say that this pasuk applies to Klal Yisrael. That the Rebbe addressed himself here to all of the Bnei Yisrael, telling them, Lo tirom, do not fear them, you should not have any fear for the Goyim, because you should know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who's heading the battle for you. However, Rashi does not say anything. So how does Rashi learn? Who does this pasuk apply to? Rebbe says we must say that Rashi Taka does not learn that the pasuk applies to all of Klal Yisrael. In fact, if we see Rashi quoting pasuk Yudches, "Va'atzav eschem lebnei Ruven v'Gad hayem medaber." So Rashi is already saying that who is he talking to? He's talking to Bnei Ruven and Bnei Gad. So we must say that Rashi is learning that this pasuk comes as a continuation. What has really happened here? Bnei Ruven and Bnei Gad, they received their share on the other side of the Yarden. Now they are told that you have to go along with the Yidden, help them conquer all of Eretz Yisrael. This is not enough. They have to be front runners. They have to go in front. Why? So it's a sort of midah keneged midah. Why is it a midah keneged midah? Being that they got what they wanted, so now they are supposed to show some sort of an extra appreciation that when they are going now along with all the Yidden to conquer Eretz Yisrael, it should be in a way that they should go ahead and help. So naturally they are afraid. When we're talking about a war, they're afraid. And the child who's learning Chumash understands this very well. So there's a pasuk here, Yeshua tzevesi beis ha'hilema. And he's saying, Yeshua I told at that time. At which time? At the time when the two Melachim were conquered in Ever HaYarden. And if we look back, and the child remembers very well, we're talking about two very strong kings. One of them who was Oig Melech HaBashan. And as Rashi already told us previously, Oig was so strong, Amma Malka Okatura, he was able to rip out mountains. Oig himself, singly, was so powerful that he was able to rip out mountains. As well, Sichon was also extremely strong. And still, he's telling Yeshua, you saw very well what the Rebishter has done to those two kings. So the Yidden, as well as all of Klal Yisrael, particularly Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruven, will think to themselves, when this happened with Yeshua, Moshe was with the Yidden. Now that they're going to have to go conquer the remainder of Eretz Yisrael, the remainder of the Lamed Aleph Melachim of the 31 kings, Moshe is no longer here. That is why the pasuk here is stressing this. Yeshua tzivesi beisahi. Yeshua was told at that time that whatever the Rebishter did to those two kings, he will do the same in Eretz Yisrael. Yeshua now is taking the place of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeshua is the leader of Klal Yisrael. Child is familiar with the pasuk Anshe Yitziyim v'Anshe Yeviyim, that by Yidden, a Yiddish king does not act like a Goyish king. A Goyish king, when his army is engaged in a battle, he sends his army out on the battle with generals. However, he himself remains home. A Yiddish king is Yitziyim v'Yeviyim. He will lead his people out into the war. He will bring them back from the war. Memela, just like Moshe played this type of a key role with the Yidden in the first two battles, with the first two kings, the same will be done by Yeshua. Who were the generals? Now a child knows that if the king can go along, like in this case, like by Yidden, the king goes along, however, a very great deal is also dependent on the generals. Who will be the generals of the Yidden here? The generals of the Yidden here were the people from the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruven, because they were the ones that went out, Chalutzim Tavru, they were the ones that went out at front. So, in order for them to succeed, there had to be strong people. They had to be strong people and understand strategy of a Milchama. And after all that, they were still afraid. So that is why Rashi tells us here that the Bnei Gad, the Bnei Ruven were very strong. Strong to the extent of the Torah Zroya Af Kotkoit, that when they chopped the head and a hand together from a person. And this was a specialty which only Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruven were able to do. So the Psukim here are stressing Loi Tirom. And who is the Loi Tirom talking to? To the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruven. They were the generals of the Milchama. They were the ones that were Chalutzim Tavru. They went in front of all of Klal Yisrael. Excuse me. And Mela the Rebishter here is saying, Loi Tirom, don't fear them. Why? Ki Hashem Elokeichem hu anilcham lachem. And just like it was by Moshe, how powerful and great Sichan and Oig war, still Moshe was able to overcome them. Now Yeshua will be going along with you, and Yeshua will act the same way as Moshe did. He will not sit home and send out the Yidden l'Milchama. He will be Asher Yitziyim v'Asher Yeviyim. He will go along with them. And Memela, just like Moshe succeeded in his Milchamas, the same thing you will also succeed in your Milchamas when you will have to conquer the remainder of Eretz Yisrael. And the Loi Tirom of the pasuk applies to whom? To the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruven. All in Yonim have a lesson which we can derive from all of this. And the Rebbe says here, it refers, every Yid has his spiritual battle. And has his chelek ba'olam, his part in the world, which one is supposed to conquer. And in order for him to conquer this part, he also has to come onto a battle. And in the battle, there's a v'toraf zroya, and there is kotkoid. Kotkoid is the head. Zroya is the arms, the hands. In other words, there's the chelek of maise, there's the chelek of action, which we're supposed to do. Hamaise hu eika is always stressed. How important deed is, action is. And at the same time, there's also a requirement for kotkoid to put our heads into it, so that we should be able to successfully be able to fulfill our spiritual battle of being goiver, our chelek ba'olam, of every Yid conquering his chelek in world which has a shaykhis to him, and be mevarad in the tzutzis kedusha which each and every Yid has to. B'negei the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, it is Perik Shlishi today. And today has a shaykhis to Shlishi because we're talking about the third Beis HaMikdash. In Perik Shlishi, there is a Mishnah which is brought down by the Alter Rebbe, which is quoted by the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, as well as the Rambam. It is Mishnah Tesvav in Perik Shlishi. The Mishnah says, Hakoil lefi roiv ha'maisa. Everything depends on as many maisim and as many acts. Now the Rambam, when he is mefarish this Mishnah, when he explains this Mishnah, he explains it as follows. If one has to give a sum of money for tzedakah, he can give this sum in one donation, and he can break up the same sum and give it in many donations. Now, as far as the recipient, it's really no difference. The recipient couldn't care less. His interest is that he should get a stuck. But the question is regarding the person who's contributing. So the Rambam derives from this Mishnah, Hakoy lefi roiv hamaisa, that is many more acts a person can do regarding giving tzedakah. He will take this very same contribution and will break it up into many contributions. He will fulfill more mitzvahs. This is a Rambam, and the Alter Rebbe and Tanya brings it as well. That if one has an opportunity to take a sum of tzedakah and break it up into smaller sums and give the smaller sum, and it'll actually reach the same total which he initially wanted to give, it is advisable for him to break it up into small amounts, and by doing so he's fulfilling more mitzvahs. The Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe talks about it, and the Rambam talks about it. The Rambam talks about it in Nigla. The Alter Rebbe talks about it in Chassidus. Because by the Alter Rebbe says, we do not find that the Alter Rebbe should mix Nigla and Chassidus. The Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, which is Chassidus. Other Svarim he wrote. Then he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is totally Nigla. For example, by the Tzemach Tzedek we find, it's very obvious by the Tzemach Tzedek and many in Yonim how he mixes Nigla and Chassidus together. However, by the Alter Rebbe we do not find it. But again, the Alter Rebbe source is the Rambam, which is a Nigla source. The Alter Rebbe brings it in Chassidus, and it's all this inyan that Hakel Firoi V'Mais. Also, talking about this inyan, the Rebbe explained that actually when we're talking about Nigla and Chassidus, it lets itself be explained as in other words, another terminology which can be used is we can apply the expression of Kamus and Eichus, quantity and quality. In Nigla, we're talking more in Yonim of Kamus, as opposed when we're talking in Chassidus, it is Eichus. Or we shall use another expression, Chaymer and Tzura, which is an expression which is used often by the Ragatshava. Chaymer meaning Gashmi is the Yonim, Tzura meaning, as we're talking about in Yonim, how they are standing in a hafshata of Gashmiyas, which is basically how Chassidus deals with the Yonim. Chassidus deals with it more on a level of Tzura. The Negei of the Siyum, which the Rebbe wants we should make a Siyum during the 9 days, and so the Rebbe did in today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe made a Siyum on Masechta Avodah Zarah.
We should eat meat during the Siyum in the 9 days?
In previous occasions, the Rebbe mentioned it. The idea of it is not to eat meat. I mean, if for some reason one wants to use it for that, can be used. But the idea is to make siyums. And a siyum, a mesechta avodah zarah, actually means concluding the inyan of avodah zarah, cutting out avodah zarah. As Pasuk says, "V'ha'elilim koresi karesu," they will be totally cut out. Talking about cutting out avodah zarah, it is something which should bring to a lot of satisfaction, to a lot of happiness. But let us look at what the Gemara tells us. Gemara relates an episode. Mar Yehuda, Gemara tells us a story. Mar Yehuda and Bati Bar Tuvi. Mar Yehuda obviously is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda and Bati Bar Tuvi. Who was Bati Bar Tuvi? We will see in a minute. Bati Bar Tuvi was a slave, was an Eved. They were sitting in front of Shavar Malka, of the king Shavar. So they served them esrik. Cooked esrik, a dessert. Esrik can be made into a dessert. Pasak ochal. He took for himself a portion, the king. Pasak v'havlei labati bartuvi, cut a portion for Bati Bartuvi. Then what he did was, he took the knife that he was cutting with, stuck it 10 times into the earth, hadar dotza asara zimna ba'are, and he sliced another piece of esrog, and he served it to Bati. And he served it to Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Simple, because of kashrus. This was a knife which was used for esrog, and as the Rebbe went on to explain, esrog al pi halacha is a davar charef, is considered sharp thing. Therefore, it's no difference whether it was a ben yomi or not a Ben Yoimi, even if it was not a Ben Yoimi, being that we're talking about a Dava Charif, it's still required that the knife should be treated. And Al Pi Halach in Yeridea, there's an eitz of taking a knife and sticking it 10 times into hard earth, hard ground. If this is done, then the knife could be used again, and that is when the king went ahead and used the knife again and cut off a portion for Rav Yehud. Amalei Bati Bar Tuvi. Bati Bar Tuvi, who was a Jewish slave, saw this. He turned to the king and he said, Va'ahu Gavra Lav Bar Yisrael. Isn't this man also a Jew, referring to himself? In other words, why did you kosher the knife after giving me a portion? Before you gave the portion to Rav Yehuda, why didn't you do the same before you gave me the portion? Amalei, so he told him as follows: Ma kimli begavei or ma loy kimli begavei. As Rashi learns Pshat, and Rav Yehuda I know that he is careful, so I had to do it. You, I don't know whether you are careful or not, so I didn't do it. That is one version of what the king told him. Ikedi Amra, there are others that told him, Itka my avdes be'ulta. Remind yourself what you did last night. If you remind yourself what you did last night, you wouldn't ask me this question. Rashi and Tosfos comment that being that they were guests of the king, and the king wanted to be a proper host and give him everything they needed, so the custom in those days was that besides serving him delicious meals and seeing to it that they get what, in terms of foods and lodging, whatever they needed, the king would also, or the achsanoi, whoever was the host, would send them a shifcha for the night. So the night before, when he sent them the shifcha, Rav Yehuda naturally declined. However, this Bati Bar Tuvi accepted her. So Mamela, if Bati Bar Tuvi accepted her, and the king was aware of that, so he didn't think that he would be careful in eating kosher food. Tosfos comments that really Bati Bar Tuvi did not sin with the shifcha. It was no aveira, in other words, that he had to do with the shifcha. Why? Because he was still an eved, and the Gemara tells us, was the Gemara in Kedushin. Gemara in Kedushin tells us, Bati Bar Tuvi biremus ruche leishokal gita dechayras. It's a very interesting Gemara. That Bati Bar Tuvi was a balgaivanik, and it didn't pass him, it wasn't suitable for him to accept this piece of paper which freed him. In other words, he really didn't want to show that he was an eved. So it was above his dignity to accept a piece of paper which frees him from being an eved. He didn't want to admit in public that he's an eved. So being that he didn't accept this piece of paper, it was really an eved. If he was an eved is mutar b'shifcha. So if an eved is mutar b'shifcha, he didn't do anything wrong. This is what Tosfos comments. And as the Rebbe explained it, we're talking about a person of Bati Bar Tuvi. It seems like he was, there's another Gemara elsewhere, which the Rebbe quoted, that he was a reputable person, this Bati Bar Tuvi. So therefore, Rebbe touched us that he saw an inyan in being that he was permitted to be with a shifcha. He saw al pi hashgacha pratis nitzutzes that he had to be mevarer by being with the shifcha. However, the question arises in this whole incident of Shavuot Malka, why Take was he so concerned? I mean, what would he care if everyone would eat kosher? He was a learned person, he knew what was going on. Why did he have to get involved? To the Bati Bar Tuvi, he didn't give kosher. For himself, he didn't give kosher. To Rabbi Yehuda, he was careful and he koshered the knife. He could have seen to it that everybody would receive kosher. He could have koshered the knife before serving everyone. And everybody would get a kosher piece of esrog. Another question which the Rebbe raised is it is customary that when one makes a siyum, when one concludes a Masechta, he ties together the beginning of the Masechta and the end of the Masechta. So where can we find a tie between the conclusion of the Masechta, which is this story, and the beginning of the Masechta, which is the beginning of Masechta Avodah Zarah, which begins with a Mishnah, Lifnei Eidein Shalev Dekachavim, Lifnei Eidein Shalev Dekachavim, Shloisha Yamim Asal Lasis V'Lasis Imoyim, which means before the Goyish Chagis, before the Goyish holidays, for 3 days, we're not allowed to have anything in common with them, because basically whatever they do during these 3 days is done for preparation to their day of celebration for Avodah Zarah. So we're going to have to find the shaykhs between the beginning of the Masechta and the end of the Masechta.
Business.
Right. As the Rebbe explained, basically, this Shavur Malka was a very intelligent person. He was a goy, and as a goy, he observed and adhered to the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, and he also lived up to a standard that a Chacham Yehenika b'maisav, that a Chacham can be recognized by all his acts. And as the Rambam describes that whatever a Chacham does, we can tell that he's a smart and intelligent person, he's a bright person. It can be noticeable when he eats and when he sleeps and when he walks and when whatever he's engaged in, we can tell that this person is smart. The main reason, the Rebbe is learning, why the king Shavur Malka wanted to be careful is because he did not want that the people around should be under the impression that Bati Bar Tuva is a full-fledged Yid. If they will think that Bati Bar Tuva is a Yid, then it could lead to marriage with him also. It could lead to chasnus. He'd be considered a Yid to everything. Therefore, for himself, he had no need in eating kosher.
In fact, it's a surah. They mentioned it's a surah where a Yid could observe the other.
Right. It's an issa for a non-Jew to observe other mitzvahs. He's supposed to observe only his Zion mitzvahs. He doesn't have to look for more. However, when it came to show a difference between Rav Yehuda and Bati Bar Tuvi, he was more than glad to. And not only was more than glad to, he wanted to. He wanted the people should see that Rav Yehuda is Rav Yehuda, and Bati Bar Tuvi is only an Evet. And he's not a Yid. How was he able to show this? How was he able to express this? Only by serving Bati Bar Tuvi the same way as he served himself. And when it came to serve Rabbi Yehuda, that is when he koshered the knife. If we look into the Gemara gives us 2 reasons. One reason is that he told him, Ma kimli begavei, or Ma loy kimli. Naturally, he didn't want to tell him that. So what he told him was, Ma kimli begavei, or Ma loy kimli begavei. I know that Rabbi Yehuda is careful, I don't know that you're careful. The other reason is itkar mai avdes be'urta. Remind yourself what you did at night. In other words, itkar mai avdes be'urta is the pshat. The Rebbe used the terms that there is a siba and a misuvav. There is something that took place, and there are results of the act. In other words, itkar mai avdes be'urta is the siba, and then there is a misuvav. As a result of what you did last night, that is why I didn't see no need to serve you kosher food today. Now let us go to the beginning of the Masechta. We just quoted the Mishnah. Mishnah begins, Lefnei Eidein Shel Akum. So right away the first piece of the Gemara goes ahead, Rav Shmuel. There's a machlokes of Rav Shmuel, who incidentally, the Rav Yehuda we are talking about in this episode, was a Talmud, was a disciple of Rav Shmuel. So we have already a little bit of the shaykhs. But there's more. Rav Shmuel, there was a machlokes of Rav Shmuel. Chatone eideihen v'chatone eideihen. Mishnah begins, as I mentioned, Lefnei eidein shel oived kechavim, before the yontev of goyim. Eidein in the Mishnah is spelled with an aleph. However, the machlokes of Rav Shmuel was, one claimed that you have to spell it with an aleph, and the other one claimed that you have to spell it with an ayin. What is the difference? And the Gemara goes on. The Gemara says the one who learns it with an aleph is not making an error, and the one who's learning with an ayin is not making an error. They are both right. The one who is learning a dayan, what's the pshat? A dayan with an ayin. A dayan with an ayin means a witness, means an eidus. What's the pshat eidus? I haven't quoted this whole Gemara, but basically, what's the pshat eidus? Eidus is a witness. When we have witness, there's a siba and a misuvav. The eidus come and say eidus that a certain thing has transpired. As a result of them saying eidus, something happens, or something is created. In fact, the Rebbe referred to it briefly. There are really in halacha there are two kinds of eidus. There are eidus that relate an incident. There are eidus that come as witness. They say they saw so and so doing such and such thing. There's a deeper thing in eidus. Eidei Kiddushin, for example. Eidei Kiddushin is not just that they relate that they saw something happening. If there's no Eidei Kiddushin, the Kiddushin is no Kiddushin. It is through Eidei Kiddushin that the Metzias of Kiddushin is created. It is through Eidei Gittin that a get can only be given over in front of Eidus. Imagine there wouldn't be Eidus, the get is no get. In other words, the Eidus are creating the Maisa. There is a Shvachere Eidus, I'm using the word Shvacha, it's not necessarily, but there's another way of Eidus, where Eidus come and relate an episode. They tell us they saw so-and-so doing such and such thing. The whole idea of Eidus comes out into a Siba or Mesuvav. Memela, the Rebbe is learning. The one who is learning Lifnei Eidein Be'ayin and is comparing it to Eidus, he will go along with the other lashon of Itka, my Avdus Bi'u, to remind yourself what you did last night, which is also a concept of Siba and Mesuvav. There's something happening, and as a result of that, something else, and then there's a result. The one who is learning the other Gilsa, he's learning Lifnei Eidein Ba'alef, which means their day of celebration, or as the Gemara explains, it's their day of their break. In other words, the Gemara used the expression Tabra, the Rebbe touched up in Yiddish, Zeya Brach, because ultimately they will realize that there's no contents in Avodah Zarah and so forth. That is why we call it a dayan, which means their day of their brach. And that, a dayan als brach is spelled with an aleph. This will correspond to the first, no union of Sibbe Mesuvav. This will correspond to the first teretz, where he said, Mar kim li begaveh, or Mar lo kim li begaveh. He considered Rabbi Yehuda being careful in kashrus, that's why he gave him the kosher food. However, he did not consider but the Bar Tuva observing it, that's why he did not kosher the knife before he gave him the portion of esrik. So we see how everything here is extremely accurate, and we also have a shaykhus between the beginning of the Masechta as well as the end of the Masechta. A good tavach.